I gotta tell you, there's a specific kind of silence that settles over a suburban cul-de-sac when things are normal, a sort of hum of lawnmowers and distant sprinklers. But that's not what I felt when I pulled into my driveway that Tuesday afternoon. It was something sharper, something that tasted like copper in the back of my throat. My name's Jack Miller, and for 15 years, I gave my life to the Marine Corps, thinking I'd seen every version of a bully there is, from the loudmouths in basic to the guys holding rifles in places you can in oppos. Fine on a map, but I never expected the most dangerous predator I'd ever faced to be wearing a polyester vest and a plastic badge in the middle of a gated community in Ohio. I remember stepping out my truck, and the first thing that hit me was the garage door being open, which was wrong because my daughter, Lily, knows the rules. We keep the world out, and we keep our home safe. I walked in, my boots heavy on the concrete, and there he was, this guy, Daryl Vance, the neighborhood's self-appointed compliance officer, a man who looked like he'd spent his whole life failing upwards into a position of microscopic power. He wasn't just talking to her, he wasn't in oppos. Just giving her a hard time about a bike left on the lawn. He had his hand clamped around her upper arm, his fingers digging into that soft skin right above the elbow, and he was leaning in so close I could see the sweat on the back of his neck. Lily was frozen, her face pale, looking like a deer staring down a semi-truck, and a look in her eyes. It wasn't into oppos. Just fear. It was that soul-crushing confusion kids get when they realize the world ISN into oppos. As safe as their dad promised it would be. I didn't in oppos. Scream. I didn't in oppos. Rush and like a madman because the Corps teaches you that movement is life and stillness is a weapon. So I just stood there for a heartbeat, watching him whisper something in her ear that made her flinch, and in that second, the 300-yard targets and the desert heat and every ounce of training I had just fused into one single cold objective. End quote. Let go of her, end quote, I said, and my voice didn't in oppos. To even sound like mine, it sounded like a tectonic plate shifting, low, and vibrating through the floorboards. Daryl jumped, his head snapping toward me. And instead of doing the smart thing, instead of running for his life, he actually had the nerve to sneer, to tighten his grip on my 12-year-old girl and tell me that she was in, end quote, gross violation, end quote, of the community safety charter. But to understand why a man like that thought he was untouchable, you have to understand the poison that had been seeping into our neighborhood for months, ever since a woman named Brenda Stoll took over the HOA board. Brenda was the kind of person who treated a neighborhood of families like a personal fiefdom, a woman who thrived on the tiny humiliations of others. And for some reason, she had it out for me from the moment I moved in. Maybe it was because I didn't in oppos, show up to her and quote, mix her and quote, events, or maybe it was because I was the only one who actually read the bylaws and pointed out that the $2,000 in quote, beautification assessment in quote, she was pushing was legally unenforceable. She hated that I didn't and oppos, blink when she glared at me. And since she couldn't and oppos, break me, she decided to use Daryl, her little attack dog with a savior complex, to go after what mattered most. Daryl started small, leaving notices on my windshield, measuring the height of my grass with a literal ruler, but then it got darker. He started showing up when my truck wasn't in oppos, in the driveway, lingering near the bus stop, telling Lily that her, in quote, father's attitude, in quote, was going to cause problems for her if she wasn't in oppos. Careful. I'd reported it to the board. I'd sent emails to Brenda, and her only response was a clinical, cold little note saying that Mr. Vance was simply performing his, in quote, official duties, in quote, and that if I felt uncomfortable, perhaps I wasn't oppos. In quote, good fit, in quote, for the community. She thought she was playing a game of chess, move and counter-move, but she forgot that when you threaten a man's child, you aren't into oppos. On a chessboard anymore. You and oppos. In the dirt. Standing there in the garage, watching Daryl's knuckles turn white on Lily's arm, I saw him smile. This smug, oily little grin that told me he thought he was the one in control, that his plastic badge gave him a shield I couldn't and oppos. Pierce. He actually told me to, in quote, remain calm, in quote, and that I was, in quote, interfering with a lawful investigation, in quote, into Lily's behavior, and that's when the last thread of my patience just snapped like a dry twig. I moved, and I didn't in oppos. Think about the consequences. I didn't in oppos. Think about the HOA. I only thought about the fact that this man was hurting my daughter, and he seemed to be enjoying it. I was on him in 2 strides, my hand catching the front of that ridiculous tactical vest he wore, and I didn't oppose. To just pull him, I launched him. He went backward, his grip on Lily breaking as she stumbled away, and I followed him through the air, driving my weight into his chest until his back hit the brick wall of the garage with a sound like a bag of wet mulch hitting the pavement. He gasped, the air leaving his lungs in a pathetic little wheeze, and for a second, I saw the exact moment he realized that I wasn't in oppos. End quote. Difficult resident, end quote. I was the guy the government spent millions of dollars training to be a nightmare. End quote. Don and oppos. Move, end quote. I told him, and he tried to swing this clumsy, desperate arc that I caught with one hand before slamming him back against the wall again. And I'll admit, there was a part of me, a dark, quiet part, that wanted to do a lot more than just hold him there. I saw the terror in his eyes, the way his bravado evaporated into a thin, watery panic, and I realized that bullies like Daryl only exist because people let them, because the end quote, Brindis end quote, of the world give them a stage to act out their pathetic little dramas. I didn't in oppos. T hit him again, not because he didn't in oppos. T deserved it, but because Lily was watching and I needed her to see that her father was a protector, not a monster. So I just pinned him there, my forearm across his throat, just enough to let him know that his life was currently a gift I was choosing to give him. I grabbed a roll of heavy-duty zip ties from my workbench, the kind I use for bundling scrap metal, and I had his hands secured behind his back before he could even figure out how to breathe again. By the time the police arrived, called by a neighbor who heard the commotion, Daryl was sobbing on the concrete, his end quote. HOA enforcement, end quote. Patch torn halfway off, looking like a broken toy. When the officers walked in, they didn't end oppos. TCA, end quote. Marine attacking a neighbor, end quote. They saw a father standing over a predator, and they saw a 12-year-old girl who was shaking so hard she couldn't end oppos. T-speak. The investigation that followed was like pulling a loose thread on a cheap sweater. The whole thing just unraveled. It turns out Daryl Vance had a history that Brenda Stoll had, end quote. Forgotten, end quote. To check, or more likely, she checked it and realized he was the perfect tool for her brand of intimidation. He had a record in 2 other counties for stalking and harassment, always targeting single parents or people he thought wooed in oppos. T fight back, and when the detectives looked at his phone, they found messages from Brenda telling him to, end quote, do whatever it takes, end quote, to make me miserable so I'd sell the house and leave. Daryl's looking at a long stretch in a place where people don and oppos. T care about HOA bylaws, and Brenda. Well, Brenda found out that when you use your position to enable a monster, the law tends to treat you like one too. She's facing conspiracy charges and a civil suit from me that's going to ensure she never sits on a board of anything more significant than a prison laundry room for the rest of her life. The neighborhood is quiet now, truly quiet, and the HOA board resigned en masse the week after the arrests, replaced by people who actually care about things like community and safety instead of power and spite. Sometimes I sit on my porch in the evening, watching Lily ride her bike in the driveway, and I think about that look in Daryl's eyes when he realized he'd crossed a line he couldn't and oppos to come back from. It makes me wonder about the world we live in, where people think a title or a vest gives them the right to touch our lives, to touch our children, and makes me wonder how many other, end quote, Daryl's, end quote, are out there right now, hiding behind some petty authority. I did what I had to do, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat, because some things are worth more than a peaceful neighborhood. They and oppos, worth everything. But I want to know what you guys think. Did I take it too far, or did I do exactly what any father worth his salt would have done in that garage? Is there ever a, end quote, right, end quote, way to handle someone who thinks they're above the law, just because they have a neighborhood board backing them up? Drop a comment below, and let's talk about it, because I have a feeling I'm not the only one who's had to deal with a, end quote, fake cop, end quote, with a real God complex. If you think I did the right thing, hit that like button, and if you and oppos, you got your own HOA horror story, I want to hear it. Stay safe out there, and remember, keep your eyes open.